ankle in the groin was it that prevented you from coming back this year?
Yeah, honestly, I've been working really hard to get back to full health, and I feel like...
What if the scoreboard didn't decide the winner, but the referee's whistle did? That's the question fans around the world were left screaming after the loss. Vegas Aces clashed with the Indiana Fever in a semifinal series that should have been remembered as a showcase of women's basketball greatness, but instead has gone down in history as one of the most blatantly manipulated, whistle-driven outcomes the league has ever seen. When A'ja Wilson, the Aces superstar, shoots 26 free throws across the series, while Aliyah Boston, the reigning Rookie of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year candidate, and the most dominant post presence in the WNBA, shoots 0 free throws in the first 2 games, and only 17 total. The numbers don't just raise eyebrows, they scream bias. This isn't about random officiating variance. This isn't about different styles of play. And it certainly isn't about one team being more aggressive. It's about the staggering reality that every crucial call, every momentum-shifting whistle, and every phantom foul fell in the direction of one team, while the other was left fighting not only their opponent, but the very officials meant to enforce fairness. Ask any Fever fan and they'll tell you the same thing. This wasn't competition, it was manipulation. From the opening tip of Game 1, the imbalance was glaring. Boston, whose bread and butter is attacking the paint, absorbing contact, and scoring through defenders, found herself swallowed by silence. She went up strong, got hacked on the arms, shoved in the back, hit in the ribs, and yet no whistle. Meanwhile, Wilson would so much as feel a hand brush her jersey, and the official's arm was already in motion, pointing toward the free throw line. 2 games in, and Boston hadn't been awarded a single free throw. A statistical impossibility for a player who touches the ball on nearly every possession and thrives on physical, back-to-the-basket dominance. And then there's the foul disparity. Boston, the one playing clean, hands up, botting Wilson straight up in the post, racked up foul after foul, 19 in total across 5 games. Wilson, on the other hand, the one setting illegal moving screens, lowering her shoulder, hooking arms, and throwing her hips to clear space, finished with just 14 fouls. The math doesn't lie, and the tape only makes the numbers look worse. By one review, Wilson committed at least 37 uncalled moving screens in the series, 37 violations ignored by the very referees, who are somehow quick to call Boston for a phantom moving screen in the 3rd quarter of Game 5, with the score still in reach. And it wasn't just the numbers, it was the timing. Basketball is a game of runs, of momentum swings, of rhythm. Every whistle either fuels that rhythm or rips it apart. In the Fever's case, the whistles never came to their aid, only to their destruction. When Boston finally found her flow, backing Wilson down, a whistle blew for a phantom offensive foul. When Indiana built momentum in transition, play was stopped for a soft foul, sending Wilson to the line. When Vegas needed a bucket in crunch time, a moving screen by Wilson clear as magically went unseen. And instead, the Fever were whistled on the very same possession. In the 4th quarter of Game 5, Boston's 5th foul came on a flop, so exaggerated it could have won an Oscar. Megan Gustafson barely absorbed contact, threw herself backward as if struck by lightning, and the refs swallowed the performance whole, pinning yet another foul on Boston. Then came the final straw, a rebound battle in the dying seconds. Boston, with perfect position, arms high, securing the ball, only to be called for her 6th foul on a 50-50th bump. That whistle didn't just eject her from the game, it ejected Indiana's heart, their anchor, their chance to win the biggest game of their season. All of this while A'ja Wilson was granted every possible cushion. Miss a shot, don't worry, the whistle will bail you out. Extend a screen with your hips, no problem, play on. Travel with your pivot foot dragging across the floor. Who cares, it's Wilson, let it slide. Double dribble on a spin move, not even worth looking at. 3 violations in 1 game each, so blatant a high school ref could have caught them, yet not a single whistle. Fans counted, Commentators shook their heads, and ESPN somehow packaged these rulebook violations into highlights. The absurdity wasn't just that Wilson got away with infractions, it was that Boston was punished for playing the game by the book. How does one star get rewarded for breaking the rules, while another is penalized for playing within them? That's the heart of the outrage, the essence of the injustice. When you piece together the puzzle, doesn't form a picture of bad luck or tough officiating, it forms the unmistakable outline of selective enforcement. 0 free throws for Boston through 2 games, 17 total compared to Wilson's 26. 19 fouls slapped on Boston, 14 on Wilson, despite the drastically different defensive assignments. 37 missed calls on Wilson's moving screens, 4 bogus fouls called on Boston in 1 game alone. Each number, each call, each non-call tilts in one direction, always lifting Vegas up and tearing Indiana down. And when the Fever still clawed their way back, still forced overtime in Game 5. The whistles struck at the most pivotal moments. A moving screen in overtime, right in front of everyone, leading directly to a Vegas 3. 13 free throws for the Aces in the closing 2 minutes of regulation and overtime combined compared to Indiana's 1. That's not balance. That's not fair play. That's not basketball, it's officiating malpractice. The cruelest irony of all. After benefiting from this whistle-driven lifeline, Wilson still had the audacity to claim victimhood. Standing in front of cameras after Game 4, she lamented that the series felt rigged, pointing to her teammates' foul totals as though Vegas were the ones under attack. This while she personally had taken 19 free throws to Boston's 15 at that point. While she personally had been shielded from illegal screen calls. While she personally had leaned on whistles as her primary source of production. It was gaslighting at its highest level. Turn the narrative before Game 5. Plant the seed that Vegas was the underdog against the referees. Then watch as the whistles ensured the opposite. The manipulation wasn't subtle, it was strategic. And the result? A semifinal that will forever be remembered not for the brilliance of the athletes, but for the corruption of the officiating. Because at the end of the day, this series wasn't lost on the court. It was stolen in the rulebook. The Fever fought with everything they had. Lexi Hall gutting it out through back pain. Kelsey Mitchell scoring until her body gave out. Odyssey Sims erupting in a performance nobody expected. And Aliyah Boston battered by phantom fouls. Still anchoring the defense and battling for every rebound. They deserved a fair chance. They earned a fair chance. But the whistles robbed them blind. This wasn't just unfair, it was disgraceful. And until the league answers for it, fans will keep asking the same question. Did the Aces beat the Fever? Or did the referees do it for them? Or did the referees do it for them? What happens when the referees stop being neutral enforcers and start acting like the sixth player on the floor? That's exactly what fans, players, and even analysts witnessed in this so-called semifinal battle between the Indiana Fever and the Las Vegas Aces, where time and again the stripes dictated momentum, controlled outcomes, and flat out decided who would be on the floor when it mattered most. By Game 5, it was no longer about Aliyah Boston versus A'ja Wilson. It was about Boston versus the whistle. Every possession carried the weight of invisible pressure. Every move inside the paint carried the risk of a phantom foul. And every rebound came with the fear that simply playing tough defense would end her night. The standard wasn't consistency. The standard was favoritism. If Wilson leaned her shoulder into contact, the whistle stayed silent. If Boston even breathed on an opponent, the shrill sound of the referee's whistle cut through the arena and sent her walking toward the bench. That's not playoff basketball, it's sabotage. The sequence of calls in Game 5 alone was enough to fuel outrage across the entire fan base. Take the third quarter where Boston set a textbook screen, feet planted, arms tucked, no lean, no slide. The kind of screen they literally teach in youth camps. Yet, somehow the whistle blew for a moving screen. Offensive foul. Possession turned over. Commentators sat stunned, unable to defend the call. Replay angles confirmed what everyone could see. Boston hadn't moved an inch. And yet the foul went on her stat line, tightening the leash already around her neck. Later in the same half, Boston spun into a routine post move against Megan Gustafson. Barely any contact. Gustafson sold it like she had been hit with a freight train, launching herself backward in a laughable flop. The refs rewarded the acting job with another foul against Boston. By then, the writing on the wall was clear. Boston wasn't allowed to play the game the way Wilson was. She was officiated under a completely different rule book. One that treated her physical dominance as a problem rather than a skill. But it didn't stop there. The defining moment came in the final minute of regulation, a tied game, tension thick in the air. Boston fought for position on a rebound against Jackie Young, securing the ball with perfect forearms, high body vertical, textbook defense. Young nudged into her, stumbled slightly, and before anyone could blink, the whistle blew again. Foul number 6 disqualified the Fever's leader, their defensive cornerstone. Their offensive engine in the post was ejected not by an opponent's brilliance, but by a referee's phantom judgment. The arena deflated, the Fever bench looked stunned, and Boston herself could only stare in disbelief. That single whistle didn't just change the possession, it changed the game, the series, and the narrative of the entire season. From that point on, Indiana's defense crumbled. Not because of effort or strategy, but because the player anchoring it was forced to watch from the sideline. And here's where the hypocrisy hits hardest. While Boston was sent packing for so-called fouls that barely existed, Wilson continued to rack up moving screens, hip checks, and hooks with total immunity. By one detailed fan review, Wilson committed at least 37 uncalled moving screens in this series. 37. That's not 1 or 2 missed calls, that's a systemic pattern of looking the other way. Meanwhile, Boston couldn't even set one legal pick without being whistled for it. Vegas benefited directly from these illegal screens, with 3-pointers and layups flowing out of possessions that should have been turnovers. By conservative estimate, the Aces gained double-digit points just from Wilson's unpunished violations, while Indiana lost both points and momentum every time Boston was slapped with a phantom foul. The double standard wasn't just glaring, it was game-altering. Even more insulting was the way Wilson and the Aces spun the narrative publicly. After Game 4, with the free throw numbers already lopsided in her favor, Wilson sat in front of cameras and claimed that she felt the series was being called unfairly against Vegas. Imagine that, a player who had taken nearly 20 free throws to Boston's 15-4 games, who had been bailed out on soft fouls time and again, who had committed dozens of uncalled violations, standing there and painting her team as the victim. The audacity wasn't just bold, it was strategic. Wilson knew Game 5 was coming. She knew the pressure was high. By planting the seed of doubt in the officials' minds, she framed the Aces as the ones supposedly battling bad whistles. And when Game 5 tipped off, the evidence showed exactly how effective that framing was. Wilson's every move came with a cushion. Boston's every move came with a penalty. By the time overtime rolled around, the whistle wasn't just tilted, it was controlling the scoreboard. 13 free throws for the Aces in the final 2 minutes of regulation and overtime compared to Indiana's 1. That's not competition, it's collusion. Becky Hammon, Vegas's head coach, only added fuel to this manipulation. Known for her fiery sideline demeanor, Hammon racked up a technical foul in Game 4 for berating the officials. Far from hurting the Aces, this outburst only tilted the refs further in their direction in Game 5. It's a well-known tactic in basketball work. The refs, plant the idea that you're being wronged, then reap the benefits when they overcorrect. The Aces executed it perfectly, and the Fever paid the price. But while Vegas was crying wolf to secure advantages, Indiana's response couldn't have been more different. Stephanie White and her team refused to wallow in excuses mid-game. They adjusted, they battled, they kept pushing forward. Even when stripped of Boston, even when stripped of Kelsey Mitchell late due to cramping, the Fever still managed to force overtime on the road against the defending champions. That wasn't luck. That wasn't whistles. That was grit, determination, and fight. Lexi Hull, playing through a painful back injury, found ways to hit big shots from deep, stretching the floor when Indiana desperately needed space. Odyssey Sims, signed late on a hardship contract, erupted with a 27-point performance, carrying stretches of the offense like a seasoned star. Kelsey Mitchell, before cramps forced her to leave the game, sliced through the Vegas defense with her trademark scoring ability, proving she was one of the most dangerous guards on the court. These were the kinds of performances that should have defined the series. These were the storylines fans should have been celebrating: grit, resilience, unexpected heroes rising under playoff lights. Instead, those stories were overshadowed, smothered by the cloud of officiating controversy that dictated the series' outcome. And then there was Boston, even under the weight of phantom fouls. Even knowing every possession carried the risk of another unjust whistle, she still played with poise, strength, and resilience. She anchored the paint, defended Wilson straight up, rebounded with power, and gave her team every ounce she had. That she fouled out wasn't a reflection of her plate, was a reflection of the bias in stripes. When she left the floor, it wasn't just her teammates who felt the void, it was every fan watching, realizing they'd been robbed of the fair showdown they deserved. Boston versus Wilson should have been an all-time battle, a classic chapter in WNBA playoff history. Instead, it was Boston versus the whistle, and the whistle won. What makes the injustice sting even more is how Indiana's season ended, with defeat born of failure. But with defeat born of theft. These Fever players didn't back down. They didn't collapse. They didn't quit. They forced overtime, they battled against the odds, and they nearly toppled the two-time champions in their own arena. But when the final horn sounded, the scoreboard didn't reflect their fight. It reflected the officiating decisions that had systematically crippled them all series long. And that's the truth fans can't let go of. Indiana didn't lose because they weren't good enough. They lost because they weren't given the chance to prove they were. What happens when a league built on dreams, competition, and legacy suddenly feels like it's being dictated by hidden agendas instead of raw talent? That's the question haunting the WNBA after this semifinals disaster. And it's the question fans, analysts, and players won't stop asking. For Indiana Fever supporters, the pain wasn't just about losing. It was about being stripped of the chance to watch their team compete fairly. For neutral fans, the anger wasn't just about one bad call. It was about the mountain of evidence proving that the refereeing standard tilted this entire series. And for the league itself, the danger isn't just reputational, it's existential. When fans begin believing games are scripted, when athletes themselves voice suspicions that outcomes are predetermined, the integrity of the sport itself begins to crumble. And after the Fever's heartbreaking overtime loss, that's exactly the narrative that has taken hold. The outrage didn't stop with fans venting on social media, exploded. Within hours of the game ending, hashtags like Justice for Fever, Refias, and Rig Game were trending. Clips of A'ja Wilson's setting, illegal moving screens without consequence, were spliced together and posted on Twitter and TikTok, racking up millions of views. Side-by-side compilations showed Boston whistled for clean plays while Wilson bulldozed through defenders unchecked. The visual evidence was impossible to ignore. Fans weren't just upset, they were mobilizing. Petitions calling for an official investigation into WNBA refereeing standards gained thousands of signatures overnight. On forums and podcasts, analysts who normally steer clear of controversy admitted on air that what unfolded looked more like manipulation than coincidence. When the people paid to protect the league's image can no longer defend what happened. The problem is bigger than just missed calls. And it wasn't just anonymous voices online. Legends of the game, former players, and media personalities chimed in. Some stopped short of saying the word rigged, but they didn't have tooth. Message was clear. Hall of Famers noted that playoff basketball has always been physical, always been tough. But never had they seen a star like Boston handcuffed so aggressively by officiating. Others highlighted the damage it does to the league's credibility when its brightest young talent is denied the opportunity to shine in the most important games. Fans tune in to see the future of basketball, Caitlin Clark feeding Aliyah Boston inside. Kelsey Mitchell hitting clutch shots. Lexi Hall making defensive stops not to see referees impose their will. Every unnecessary whistle robbed the game of its natural storylines, leaving instead a bitter aftertaste of what could have been. Even more troubling is the growing suspicion that this wasn't just incompetence, it was intentional. Many pointed out how much money was riding on the Aces continuing their run. Ticket sales, sponsorship deals, broadcast ratings, and the league's own marketing campaigns that had leaned heavily into promoting Las Vegas as a dynasty. With the defending champs in the spotlight, the narrative was set, and the league stood to gain financially by keeping that story alive. Whether the referees acted consciously or subconsciously under that pressure is impossible to prove. But the results were undeniable. Every big moment seemed to swing toward Vegas. Every questionable whistle leaned against Indiana, and by the end, the perception of bias wasn't just plausible, it was overwhelming. And then came the human side of it, all the players themselves. Boston, visibly emotional in her post-game press conference, chose her words carefully but couldn't hide her disappointment. She spoke about the importance of staying composed, about controlling what she could control, but the sadness in her tone said more than her words. This wasn't just a playoff loss, it was a theft of opportunity. Kelsey Mitchell, sitting beside her, echoed the sentiment, noting how hard the team had fought, how much they had overcome, and how gutting it was to fall short not because of effort but because of circumstances outside their control. Stephanie White, fiery but measured, didn't mince words. She demanded accountability, questioning why her team was held to one standard while their opponents were allowed to play under another. In a league desperate to grow its audience, the last thing anyone expected was for one of its own coaches to essentially accuse the officiating of destroying competitive balance. Yet there she was, saying what millions were already thinking. Meanwhile, Aja Wilson celebrated her advance to the finals. But even her post-game comments couldn't escape scrutiny. She downplayed the criticism, brushing off talk of favoritism, and insisted the Aces had simply played harder. But to Fever fans, those words stung like salt in an open wound. How could she claim effort alone decided the outcome when free throws and phantom fouls had dictated so much of the game? Some fans accused her of gaslighting, others of strategic PR spin. But either way, her words only widened the divide between the two sides. The Aces basked in glory, while the Fever were left to pick up the pieces of a season that ended not